Not all returns after no contact are rooted in deep emotional change or realization. Sometimes men return out of temporary regret, an emotional reaction to the absence they've experienced, rather than a lasting shift in their feelings or intentions. Regret can be a powerful motivator, but it's often fleeting and doesn't necessarily indicate growth or a meaningful change in their approach to the relationship. When someone is faced with the prospect of losing a connection they once had, it can trigger regret, especially if they begin to realize they miss the comfort, familiarity, or emotional support that was once provided. This initial feeling of loss can push them to reach out as a way of correcting a mistake or reestablishing something they value. However, this regret doesn't always go beyond the surface level. It's driven by the recognition of what was lost, rather than a fundamental change in their understanding of the relationship or their role in it. In these cases, the return may be short-lived, as the underlying issues that led to the distance in the first place remain unresolved. The regret may be more about missing the comfort of the relationship rather than genuinely understanding or addressing the reasons behind the disconnect. While this can lead to an attempt to reconnect, it's often not sustainable if the emotional or relational issues are not addressed. It's important to recognize that not every return is a sign of deep self-reflection or personal growth. Sometimes it's just a momentary regret, a response to the discomfort of absence that drives the desire to return. This kind of return may not lead to lasting change, as it's more about alleviating the temporary pain of loss rather than a true shift in priorities or feelings. Have you ever noticed that sometimes when you finally move on, when you finally stop waiting, that's exactly when they come back? It's almost as if the moment you stop chasing, they start noticing. But why does this happen? Why do men return after no contact? To understand this, we need to look beyond just behavior. We need to understand human nature, because at the heart of it, relationships aren't just about words or actions. They're about emotions, patterns, and psychology. Today, I want to take you through a deeper perspective, not just about why they return, but what it truly means for you and how you can take control of your own story. But let's start with a simple but powerful question. What really drives human connection? When something is easily accessible, it's often taken for granted. This is a fundamental principle of human behavior. What is abundant loses its perceived value, while what is rare becomes desirable. This applies to relationships just as much as it does to material possessions. When a person is always available, always responding, and always present, there is no sense of urgency or need to appreciate them. But the moment that availability is removed, the perspective shifts. When men experience no contact, they are confronted with a void where attention, validation, and familiarity once existed. Suddenly, what was once taken for granted is no longer there, and the mind begins to place a higher value on what has been lost. This is not always a conscious process. It's a reaction to the psychological principle of scarcity. The less accessible something becomes, the more the mind fixates on it. It creates a sense of urgency, a need to reclaim what was once easily obtained. Scarcity also triggers curiosity. When you withdraw, it leaves room for questions to arise. What is she doing? Has she moved on? Is she happier without me? This curiosity is powerful because it forces introspection, making a person reevaluate the role you played in their life. It disrupts their comfort and creates an emotional gap they didn't anticipate. Additionally, when someone pulls away, it forces the other person to reflect on what made that connection valuable in the first place. They start remembering the good moments, the support, and the emotional connection they once had. The emotional weight of those memories intensifies when faced with the possibility that they may never experience them again. This is why absence has such a profound effect. It transforms the way people perceive what they once overlooked. When there's space between two people, it often triggers a deep emotional shift. Loss, whether it's real or perceived, has a powerful impact on human psychology. People tend to value things more when they fear losing them, and this is exactly what happens when contact is broken. For men, especially, the absence of someone they care about can evoke a response driven by the fear of losing something significant. They begin to realize what they took for granted. The absence doesn't just make them miss the person physically, it forces them to confront their emotional attachment. When you're no longer easily reachable, they are reminded of how your presence once filled a gap in their life. This realization often arrives in the form of regret. They start reflecting on how things were before and begin to recognize their own mistakes. What was once overlooked now becomes a critical part of their emotional landscape. The fear of loss prompts a reevaluation of what was once trivialized or assumed to be permanent. But the fear of loss isn't always about the individual themselves. It's about the emotional connection they provided. It's the reassurance, the comfort, and the emotional security that was taken for granted. When a person is no longer available, it shines a light on the emptiness left behind, creating a gap that feels hard to ignore. This emptiness is a key factor that drives the urge to reconnect, even if the initial break was caused by misunderstandings or a lack of effort. In essence, the void created by absence has a magnetic effect. It draws people back, often to reconcile or to fill that emotional gap. Familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort is a powerful force in human relationships. When someone is a constant presence in your life, their role becomes so embedded in your routine that it's easy to overlook their value. The patterns and predictability of everyday interactions create a sense of security, but when that presence disappears, it disrupts the equilibrium, and the mind starts to crave the comfort it once had. For men, the return to something familiar is a natural response to emotional discomfort. When you are a stable presence in their life, they grow accustomed to the emotional safety you provide. Your actions, your words, the way you make them feel. All of these things become part of a comforting routine that they don't even realize they depend on until it's no longer there. The absence creates an emotional void, and the desire to return to what once felt secure becomes almost instinctive. Familiarity also has a way of easing anxiety and uncertainty. Life can be unpredictable and stressful, and having someone familiar, someone who knows them and understands their patterns, acts as an emotional anchor. When a man faces a period of emotional turbulence or confusion, he may instinctively seek out that comfort, that sense of knowing what to expect, even if it means returning to you after a period of no contact. It's not necessarily about romantic feelings, but rather about the deep-seated need for familiarity to ease anxiety. In this sense, it's not always about you as an individual, but rather about the role you play in their emotional life. They know what they're going to get with you, and the comfort of that predictability is something they'll often return to, even if they didn't fully appreciate it while they had it. Ego plays a significant role in human behavior, especially when it comes to relationships. For many men, being in a relationship or having someone consistently available can serve as a form of validation. It reinforces their sense of self-worth and importance. However, when that validation is no longer easily accessible, it can stir feelings of insecurity and self-doubt. The absence of your presence creates a gap in their ego's sense of being valued or needed, which can trigger the desire to reassert themselves and regain that affirmation. Men may return after a period of no contact because they want to know that they still matter, that they still hold value in your life. This return is often less about genuine emotional connection and more about fulfilling an ego need. They want to feel wanted again, to feel like they are still important to you and that their absence hasn't diminished their significance in your life. This behavior is closely tied to the desire for control and dominance in the relationship. When someone withdraws or cuts off contact, it can feel like a loss of control over the situation. In response, a man may return to reassert that control and to reaffirm his position in the dynamic. The need to feel desired, needed, and central to someone else's life is a powerful motivator. And when that source of validation is cut off, it can stir the ego to act in a way that seeks to regain that position. This need for validation doesn't always align with a desire for a long-term commitment or a shift in emotional priorities. Rather, it is a temporary boost to their sense of self-esteem and ego, an attempt to fill the void that the absence has created in their own sense of worth. When there's distance in a relationship, the emotional imbalance created by absence often forces both parties to reevaluate their feelings. For men, the emotional shift that occurs when contact is broken can be jarring. It's not just about missing someone. It's about realizing the emotional support, comfort, and stability that was once provided is now gone. This emotional gap can feel unsettling. And in some cases, it's this very imbalance that prompts the desire to return. When a man is used to receiving emotional support or attention from someone, and that is suddenly withdrawn, the disruption causes him to reflect on what he lost. In the absence of the familiar, he begins to process emotions he may have previously ignored or dismissed. This emotional imbalance is a reminder of what was once a consistent source of reassurance and stability. It's not always about the individual, but the emotional equilibrium they provided. The void left by the absence doesn't just highlight what is missing, it intensifies feelings of regret and longing. The realization that the emotional support they once relied on is no longer present forces them to reassess their previous actions or neglect. This shift often leads to self-reflection as they begin to understand the emotional weight of their past behavior, which they might not have fully appreciated when everything was normal. The emotional imbalance makes them realize how important you were to their emotional well-being. In many cases, this imbalance doesn't just push them to return, it forces them to confront the reality that they need to correct the emotional disconnect. It's an opportunity to reassess and possibly try to restore the emotional balance they once had. However, it's important to note that the emotional imbalance might not always lead to a true, long-term change. It may simply be a moment of reflection that drives the need to fill the emotional gap. Human nature is inherently resistant to change. People often seek comfort and familiarity, avoiding the discomfort that comes with unfamiliarity or new experiences. When someone has been a consistent part of your life, that connection becomes part of the routine, a predictable, steady presence. It's easy to fall into the trap of assuming that things will always remain the same, but when that consistency is disrupted, it forces a person to confront change, which is often met with resistance. For many men, returning after no contact is less about rekindling feelings and more about restoring something that feels comfortable and predictable. They don't always seek change because deep down they crave stability. The routines, the interactions, and the dynamic between the two of you become a source of comfort. When this is taken away, it creates a sense of unease. The fear of change can cause them to return, not necessarily because they've had a profound revelation, but because they are searching for the stability and consistency they once had. Moreover, the resistance to change often comes from a place of avoiding the emotional discomfort that comes with it. Change forces a person to reassess their feelings, their behavior, and even their role in the relationship. The longer the distance, the more emotionally charged the change becomes, making it harder to move forward or accept the new reality. In response, men may return simply to revert to the familiarity they once knew, seeking comfort rather than facing the discomfort of growth or moving on.
It's not always about growth or maturity. It's about maintaining the status quo, avoiding the vulnerability that comes with stepping into the unknown. The fear of change often drives the desire to return, to restore what once felt predictable and safe.
When you change, everything around you changes, including the way others perceive you. For many men, the return after no contact is sparked by the subtle but powerful shift in your behavior, demeanor, or outlook on life. Personal growth often changes the dynamic in a relationship, and when someone sees you evolving, it can stir both admiration and a desire to reconnect. The change might be physical, emotional, or even behavioral. Perhaps you've become more confident, independent, or focused on your own well-being. This transformation can be magnetic because it signals strength and resilience. Men may notice this change and find themselves drawn back to see who you've become. It's not always about rekindling what was lost, but more about being intrigued by the person you've become in their absence. The growth you display can make them realize that you are no longer the same person they left behind. You are someone stronger, more self-assured, and more independent. This transformation can be a wake-up call for them. When you change, it disrupts their expectations and forces them to confront the reality that you are capable of thriving without them. They may return not only out of curiosity, but also because they see that you no longer need validation or approval from them. This shift can make them reconsider their own behavior and even spark a feeling of urgency to reestablish their place in your life. Your growth doesn't just alter how they view you, it alters how they see themselves in relation to you. They may return out of a sense of wonder, attraction, or even fear of losing someone who has evolved into a more powerful version of themselves. The change you embody creates a new dynamic, one that they are often eager to explore and understand. The power of choice is one of the most significant factors in relationships. When someone returns after no contact, it's often because they realize that you now have the ability to choose, and that your choices no longer revolve around them. The absence has given you space to grow, heal, and reevaluate what you truly want. When you stand firm in your decision to not engage, it places the power back in your hands, and this shift can be a powerful motivator for someone to return. Men may come back because they now understand that you are no longer waiting for them or relying on their presence to feel whole. You have the freedom to choose your own path. and that autonomy is incredibly attractive. It forces them to acknowledge that their actions, or inactions, no longer dictate the course of your life. They return because they are no longer the center of your universe. And the awareness that they are no longer in control is both humbling and motivating. Your ability to choose is a reminder of your strength and independence. When someone has been removed from the equation, it makes them realize the significance of the role they once played and how easily that role can be filled by someone else. They may return because they fear being replaced, or they may simply want to reassert their place in your life. However, the key is that you are no longer dependent on them for your happiness or fulfillment. Ultimately, the power of choice shifts the dynamic in any relationship. It forces both parties to reevaluate their actions and intentions. And it reminds them that relationships should be built on mutual respect, effort, and desire, not obligation or convenience. The choice is yours, and that is what makes you truly powerful. In conclusion, the reasons men return after no contact are complex, rooted in deep-seated psychological principles and emotional needs. Whether it's the scarcity of your presence, the comfort of familiarity, or the ego that seeks validation, the absence creates a powerful shift in their perception and desire. The return is often driven by the emotional imbalance that comes with loss, the resistance to change, and the instinct to reclaim control. Yet, not all returns are rooted in lasting growth. Sometimes they stem from temporary regret, or the realization that the person they once knew has evolved into someone even stronger. But in all of this, what truly matters is your ability to recognize the power you hold. The key is to always remember that you are in control of your own narrative, and your worth is never dependent on someone else's return.